Hey Laila, it's Miss Becca, and today I want to read to you the start of a chapter book, and that is going to be a book that has lots of different stories in it, and it's about a little girl who I think is a second grader. So she's about your age, and she is very precocious and feisty. She tells amazing stories, and she begins to teach her second grade class the art of storytelling. So I thought, since this was about this girl, Gooney Bird Greene, and she's kind of kooky, that I would wear a kind of kooky hat to read for you today. So this is Gooney Bird Greene by Lois Lowry. Lois Lowry is one of my favorite authors. She has a Newbery Award-winning book called Number of the Stars. This is a book that she's written. And she says that this book about Gooney Bird Greene is kind of some stories about her when she was a girl and she moved around a lot, and kind of going and starting fresh in new settings. And there aren't a lot of pictures since it's a chapter book. So when there is a picture, I'll zoom in and show you, and I'll try to upload chapter 1 for you. Gooney Bird Greene by Lois Lowry. Lois Lowry dedicates this book for Beanie and Chelsea from their grandmas, which is Lois Lowry and MT, who drew the sketches, the illustrations. Chapter 1. There was a new student in the Water Tower Elementary School. She arrived in October after the first month of school had already passed. She opened the second grade classroom door at exactly 10 o'clock Wednesday morning and appeared there all alone, without even a mother to introduce her. She was wearing pajamas, cowboy boots, and she was holding a dictionary and a lunchbox. "Hello, Miss Pigeon," the second grade teacher said. "We're in the middle of a spelling lesson." "Good," said the girl in pajamas. "I brought my dictionary. Where's my desk?" "Who are you?" Miss Pigeon asked politely. "I'm your new student, and my name is Gooney Bird Greene. That's Green with a silent E on the end. I just moved here from China, and I want the desk right smack in the middle of the room, because I like to be right smack in the middle of everything." And so here's the illustration of Gooney Bird Greene showing up. The class stared at the new girl with admiration. They had never met anyone like Gooney Bird Greene. She was a good student. She sat down at the desk Miss Pigeon provided, right smack in the middle of everything, and began doing second grade spelling. She did all her work neatly and quickly, and she followed instructions. But soon it was clear that Gooney Bird was mysterious and interesting. Her clothes were unusual, her hairstyles were unusual, even her lunches were unusual. At lunchtime on Wednesday, her first day in school, she opened up her lunchbox and brought out sushi and a pair of bright green chopsticks. On Thursday, her second day at Water Tower Elementary School, Gooney Bird Greene was wearing a pink ballet tutu over green stretch pants, and she had 3 small red grapes, an avocado, and oatmeal cookie for lunch. Laila, do you know anyone who likes to wear a tutu? I think your mom likes to wear a yellow tutu, and her crazy friends wear tutus with her. On Thursday afternoon after lunch, Miss Pigeon stood in front of the class with a piece of chalk in her hand. "Today," she said, "we are going to continue to talk about stories." "Yay," the second graders said in very loud voices, all but Felicia Ann, who never spoke, and Malcolm, who was not paying attention. He was under his desk as usual. "Gooney Bird, you weren't here for the first month of school, but our class has been learning about what makes good stories, haven't we?" Miss Pigeon said. Everyone nodded, all but Malcolm, who was under his desk doing something with scissors. Class, what does a story need most of all? Who remembers? Miss Pigeon had her chalk in her hand in the air, ready to write something on the chalkboard. The children were silent for a minute. They were thinking, and finally, Chelsea raised her hand. Chelsea, what does a story need? A book, Chelsea said. Miss Pigeon put down her chalk. There are many stories that don't need a book, she said pleasantly. Aren't there, class? If your grandma tells you a story about when she was a little girl, she doesn't have to have that story in a book, does she? The class stared at Miss Pigeon, all but Malcolm, who was still under his desk, and Felicia Ann, who always looked at the floor. She never raised her hand, and she never spoke. Beanie said, "My grandma lives in Boston." Kiko said, "My grandma lives in Honolulu." And Ben said loudly, "My grandma lives in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania." Tricia shouted, "My grandma's rich." "Class, class," Miss Pigeon said. "Shh." And then in a much quieter voice, she explained, "Another time, we will talk about our families, but right now." She stopped talking, and she looked at Barry Trunkman. Barry was up on his knees in his seat, and his hand was waving in the air as high as he could make it wave. "Barry," Miss Pigeon said, "do you have something that you simply have to say? Something that can't possibly wait?" Barry nodded his head yes, and he waved his hand even more. "What is so important, Barry?" Barry stood up at his desk. Barry Tuckerman liked to make very important speeches, and they always required that he stand up. "My grandma," Barry Tuckerman said, "went to jail once. She was 20 years old, and she went to jail for civil disobedience." Then Barry sat down. "Thank you for sharing, Barry. Now look at what I'm writing on the board, class. Who can read this word?" Everyone, all but Malcolm and Felicia Ann, watched as she wrote a long word on the board, and then they shouted it out, "Beginning!" "Good," said Miss Pigeon. "Now I'm sure you'll all know this one." So she began to write again. "Middle!" the children shouted. "Good. And can you guess what the last word will be?" She held up her chalk and she waited. And in unison the class cried, "End!" "Correct," Miss Pigeon said. "Good for you, second graders. Those are the parts of a story. A story needs a beginning, a middle, and an end. Now I'm going to write another very long word on the board. Let's see what good readers you are." So she wrote a C and an H. "Miss Pigeon," someone called. She wrote an A, then an R. "Mrs. Pigeon," several children were calling now. She turned to see what was so important. Malcolm was standing beside her desk, and he was crying. "Malcolm needs to go to the nurse, Miss Pigeon," Beanie shouted. Miss Pigeon went to Malcolm and knelt beside him. "What's the trouble, Malcolm?" she asked, but he couldn't stop crying. I know, Nicholas said. Nicholas always knew everything, and his desk was beside Malcolm's. "Tell me, Nicholas, remember Kiko showed us how to make origami stars?" All the second graders reached into their desk and into their pockets and their lunch boxes, and there were tiny stars everywhere. Kiko had shown them how to make origami stars out of small strips of paper. The stars were very easy to make. The school janitor had complained just last Friday that he was sweeping up hundreds and hundreds of origami stars. "Malcolm put one of the stars in his nose," Nicholas said, "and now he can't get it out." I think that would kind of hurt Laila if you had something up your nose. I know that you sometimes have to have your oxygen in your nose, and that probably feels a little uncomfortable. So imagine a pointy paper origami star. Don't sniff, Malcolm. Do not sniff. That is an order, said Miss Pigeon. She took him by the hand and she walked with him to the classroom door. She turned around to the class. Children, she said, I'm going to be gone for exactly 1 minute and 30 seconds while I walk Malcolm to the nurse's office. Stay in your seats while I'm gone. Think about the word character. Character is what a story needs. When I come back from the nurse's office, we are going to create a story together. You must choose who the main character will be, talk amongst yourselves quietly, and think about the characters that you know of, like Abraham Lincoln or maybe Christopher Columbus. Babe Ruth? Called Ben. Yes, Babe Ruth is a possibility. I'll be right back. So Miss Pigeon left the classroom with Malcolm, and when she returned, 1 minute and 30 seconds later, without Malcolm, the class was waiting quietly. They had been whispering, all but Felicia Ann, who never whispered. Have you chosen? She asked the class. The class nodded. All of their heads went up and down except Felicia Ann, because she always looked down at the floor. And your choice is? All the children, all but Felicia Ann, called out together, Gooney Bird Greene, they called.